Morning and welcome to this meeting of the Scottish Affairs Committee. Today we're looking at digital connectivity in Scotland, and we're very pleased to have three people who know quite a lot about that kind of issue and have personal experience of it too with us today. So could I, just starting with Anne, ask you all to introduce yourselves and say what your role is, please.
Morning, Chair. My name is MacDonald. I'm from Tiree, but I'm also here mainly as a representative of the Scottish Islands Federation, which is a network of community-led organisations which promote the interests of Scottish Islands, or inhabited Scottish Islands.
I'm Rhoda Meek, and I am also from the Isle of Tiree. I'm the head of communications and Gaelic at the Tiree Community Development Trust, so I'm speaking on behalf of the community of Tiree today.
Hello everybody, my name is Mhari and I'm here today from the Shetland community. I'm here as an outspoken resident who was severely impacted by broadband outages in 2025.
Excellent, thank you all very much for making the journey down. I'm glad you all got here safely. Rhoda, could I come to you first? I understand that following Storm Amy, Tiree was without any digital connection for up to 7 weeks. Could you describe the impact that had on the island?
Absolutely. So when Storm Amy landed on the 3rd of October, it knocked out, we had a major power outage, which also simultaneously knocked out multiple services. And as the power came back on, internet connectivity didn't return. And that included all forms of communication. So it wasn't just home broadband, but also the 4G network, all voice services, and for a period of time, a substantial part of the 999 service as well. When the community realised somewhere around the 8th of October that our cable was broken, things started to kind of get into gear in terms of figuring out where the impact was going to be most felt. To give you an example, households could not reliably call family or parts of the emergency services or medical services. Businesses couldn't take card payments. They couldn't access their ordering systems. We couldn't top up electricity meters because that relies on an internet connection in the shop. And things like paying your bills, accessing cash was very difficult for people. Buying fuel, our fuel station also requires all these internet connections. So everything that feels on like a normal activity day to day was severely impacted. Everything comes in on that one cable, which is about that size and width. And so all forms really of communication were down until about the 10th of October. The BT Group sent out an emergency response team, and things started to gradually come back online using Starlink as the main means of putting things like the medical practice back online and connecting some services back up. It was a couple of days later that the 4G masts came back online as well, again using satellite, and that was EE, the Emergency Services Network. It took until the 21st of October for the other network providers, O2 and Vodafone, to come back online. And it was the 18th of November, a full 7 weeks later, before the cable was repaired and Tiree was back to having full connectivity.
That sounds horrendous, I have to say. And I understand from other conversations we've had that there was no 999 service for up to, 6 days, I think you mentioned yourself, actually. Was that a widespread loss, or was it patchy?
It would be fair to describe it as patchy. At the height of the storm, there would have been no way of contacting the emergency services at all, unless you had an analogue line. Still, and those are of course being phased out now, so a large part of the island no longer has analogue phone lines. That assumes that the person at the other end of that phone was on an analogue line. So it's very hard to extrapolate exactly what the consequences could have been, but they could have been catastrophic. One of the key points, I think, is that the 999 emergency services network on mobile defaults to the last mast of resort, which would go through all the providers if EE wasn't available. Unfortunately, the Vodafone dishes were also knocked out of alignment, and that took down O2. So by mobile, it was very difficult. My end of the island, I could get a weak signal from the Isle of Mull, so in theory I could have. But I guess theory and weak signal standing outside aren't enough. One of the key things is that our medical practice is one of the buildings which had moved to digital and digital voice, which meant that the doctor's surgery couldn't be contacted as a result of that. And that was probably locally one of the biggest impacts for us. At one point, for the first kind of 6 or 7 days, there was a note, a handwritten note on the surgery door, letting people know that if the doctor wasn't there and they couldn't reach him, this was the house he was staying at. Now, on one hand, it sounds quaint. On the other, if it's minutes that you're counting an emergency, and that, So I think we were very, very fortunate that there wasn't a catastrophe and that someone wasn't, hurt or worse. But yeah, so patchy. But the big concern is that the emergency services network itself is reliant on that cable, which has a single point of failure. We also know that the battery backup is very low, is very short on that. That was less of an issue for us because we simply didn't have a connection. But the battery backups are low, and there's no alternative route for that 999 service. So there's no satellite backup, for example. Now, as soon as the emergency response team arrived, they were able to plug the masts into a satellite backup. So in future, one way of protecting that service would be to look at that as a standard failover and an expectation that's done. And it was very, I think my last point on the 999 issue was that there's no playbook. There was no clear incident plan. There was no rehearsed plan for what happens to emergency calling in that situation. Who's in charge? Where do you go? All of that. So it was widespread. Yes.
And is there work now ongoing to ensure that a chain of command, and that there is an alternative that people can, or that there will be some kind of system will kick in that will help people to navigate the problems they have?
I think that might be one area where committees like yourselves might be able to help. It remains unclear. There are local resilience partnerships, but they are, the communications providers are conspicuous by their absence in those. So Power would be expected to be there, Scottish Power would be expected to be there, and other critical infrastructure. But digital, I believe, is not currently considered critical infrastructure. In a situation where you have medical alerts now on the internet, where you have children's diabetes glucose monitors are internet enabled, I think there's a case for digital connectivity to be considered as critical infrastructure, and for those providers to be included in local resilience partnerships. There's a conversation happening at the moment in Tiree, as an example, where the Community Development Trust, we took a leading role in this incident because we had the skills within the organisation to do that, is being asked, could we, in future be part of that resilience planning? And the theory is good, but the cost, the staff cost of that time and that implementation is large. And community development trusts are already carrying quite a burden and doing quite a lot of the things that, as a rule, a statutory local authority would do. So in our context, I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. It's also a conversation that needs to be resourced, or a role that needs to be resourced.
Thank you. I don't want to sound like a tabloid journalist here, but not that I've got that much against tabloid journalists, you understand, but I mean, were there near misses? Were there situations where there could have been a catastrophe, but it was averted either by people stepping in or by luck?
I think it was simply luck that there wasn't a near miss. I'm not aware of one, but I do know that there were some vulnerable people who, were unable to access care provision briefly. Our care services are fantastic and our home care. One of the beauties of an island and one of the fortunate things about an island is that we know each other, and people go and they check on each other. That's a good thing, but it shouldn't be assumed that's going to happen. Just prior to the power going out, I guess one example was that somebody on Facebook asked whether anyone was available to help because water was coming in through their smoke detector and sparking. And the power went out shortly afterwards. Now, the outcome in that situation was good, but it had the alternative, a few minutes later, or a different scenario, and you could have seen a very different outcome there.
And beyond the care sector and emergency services, were there any other, I suppose, critical systems that failed as a result of these problems?
There were so many services that failed as a result of this problem. There was a real cascade effect, and I think it really brought home to us all just how much we rely on the internet these days to get the basics done. So the bank couldn't open, the post office couldn't open, the fuel station had no remote monitoring for its CCTV, so our fuel station is community owned and therefore not monitored 24/7 physically, so that relies on off-site mainland monitoring, which when you're dealing with that amount of petrol is really important. I guess the electricity top-ups are also important. Small businesses, I run my own, you rely on the internet for sales. Yeah. For bookings, doing payroll, crofters compliance, you have 28 days to register new calves, for example. This outage was double that. So people were in breach of legal responsibilities. The school was offline, but this situation coincided with half-term. So the school itself, had this continued or had it happened at a different time, Tiree is partnered with Oban and does a lot of video conference and a lot of online and remote learning. But young people were in the run-up to their prelims here as well. There's a lot of online tutoring. So, I was in one meeting where someone said, when we were bringing this topic up and trying to avoid filtering on our community network, they said, well, you should just read a book. And unfortunately, it's not as simple as that in 2026. This wasn't about streaming and it wasn't about Netflix. It was about access to critical and important services.
Very helpful, thank you. Susan Mhari.
Thank you. So I'd like to sort of maybe change it to asking you specifically about the resilience that is or isn't built in and how effective Starlink was in meeting the needs of local people. And I'm just wondering whether there was a cohort of people that were better supported once Starlink came in and whether other people were not as well provided for.
Yeah, so there was no resilience built in. With these single spur cables, you're almost building a single point of failure in as a design feature. So it was the cable or it was nothing. In Tiree, we were fortunate. We've been running a community broadband network due to the lack of fibre. For the last, it'll be 21 years this year, and we were in the process of winding that network down. We still had half of that network in place. And so when the emergency response team arrived from BT, they quickly deployed Starlink in a variety of key locations. And, we'd like to thank that team. We cannot fault them. They did an incredible job. They arrived, they looked at the landscape, they looked at the thickness of our walls, they looked at the weather, and they quickly understood what we were dealing with. And so Starlink deployment was highly effective as an emergency stopgap. There's no two ways about it. It was deployed at the surgery, for example. And due to having our own community network, which was still covering about 160 premises, we were able to get a Starlink and plug that into our network because of the number of vulnerable people and isolated people we were serving. And because of the way our network works, it took our network engineer an afternoon to plug it in and reroute it, and that put about a third of the island back online. Certainly not at a fast speed, not at a speed you would want to stream on or watch TV on, but in a way that you could at least get the basics. So for a group of people in Tiree, we were able to provide them a basic service, and that allowed people to go to friends' houses and try and get themselves online. Starlink was deployed to a number of community hotspots as well, so people could use the internet. We had a bench outside the telephone exchange, and people were parked outside the community hall in their cars, taking their emails and things like that. Not ideal, but it was certainly far better than nothing.
So, do you think that solution is workable for if a similar outage came again? And I suppose in addition to that, the BT has taken the cost of that. Who do you think will ultimately bear the costs of these outages?
I think in the future, satellite, to us in Tiree, satellite seems like the sensible backup option in almost all situations. We would want to see Starlink or equivalent deployed as a failover mechanism to exchanges, so that if one route goes down, the satellite option kicks in. The same for our mobile phone masts, particularly the emergency services one. There should always be a separate backhaul route for these. Tiree was in a very unique position because we had the ability to get internet to quite a large number of people. Had we been able to work more effectively, I guess, and with BT, we could have got it to more people. Unfortunately, we ended up in a situation where we were pressured to restrict that service to only the vulnerable in the community, which was very hard for us to work out. We were being put in a very difficult position by being asked to work out who was vulnerable and make decisions. At the same time, the home care and the council's back office services were offline. So we ended up, there was quite a lot of time was spent negotiating and trying to keep that community connection online, and a large part of the argument was directly cost related, because everything has a budget and data costs money. I think the people who should pay for that type of data backup are the cable owners and the providers of the communication providers, because if you are not building resilience in, then the outcome could be catastrophic. And if the resilience isn't built in and you then have to provide a service, then you should pay to be providing that service to people. We live 4 hours offshore. We're used to bad weather, we're used to making do, and we don't expect perfection at all. When things go down, you know they're going to go down, and you can plan for that. But there does have to be an expectation of a basic level of service, and that should be provided not by community organisations working overtime, but by the communications providers themselves.
The contract for the service should include delivering the wider service when things go wrong.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Elaine Stewart.
Rhoda, how adequate do the islanders consider BT's response to the damage caused by Storm Amy?
The initial response, I think that the islanders were satisfied with the initial response. We were certainly very impressed that as soon as it became clear the cable was broken, and I think that's an interesting. It was somewhere between the 3rd of October when the cable broke and the 8th of October before the community discovered that it was the cable that was broken. Prior to that, we thought there was an issue in the exchange in Mull. Now, what BT knew and when, I don't know. It was a very confused time. There was a complete lack of communications. Fibre was being laid at the time in Tiree, and about 10 fibre vans were at my end of the island waving a phone in the direction of Mull, trying to contact the office. So it was very confused. As soon as we were all aware there was an issue, BT scrambled an emergency response, and they were fantastic on the ground. So in terms of the response on the ground, it was excellent, and it was what was required at the time. In terms of that longer-term piece of how you keep a community online and how you get the best service to people, between the the critical failure and the fix, I think that was far less thought through, because there's an expectation that this won't happen. There's an assumption it won't happen. I've sat in more than one meeting where I was assured, having asked the question more than a few years ago, what happened when the cable broke? I was assured that it wouldn't break, that it was far more resilient than analogue, and that wasn't something that we should be concerned about. So it's not fun to be proved right in that situation. The questions have been asked for a long time. So in the long term, we want to see more effort being given to this question of resilience, and that's not being taken seriously enough as far as any community, I think, on a single cable is expecting it to be. I feel like I didn't answer that question quite as well as I would have liked.
Oh, that's fine. Did they give any reason why it took 7 weeks to repair the cable?
I think 7 weeks was probably quite a short time frame. It could have been an awful lot worse. The boat that fixes these cables was otherwise deployed. There's not many of them, and we had to wait for that to travel. You have to get a whole range of marine certificates and things signed off for work in these areas. Fortunately, the Scottish Government got involved somewhere around the end of middle to end of October there, when we put quite a lot of political pressure on, and things really did start to motor, and boat was put on standby, and so 7 weeks from start to finish was probably, we probably did well. We got a good weather window. It should have been 6 weeks, but the weather blew up. We were fortunate with the weather. At one point we thought it could be well into the new year before we'd get a boat out to do the fixes. So yes, it was a long time. It could have been a lot worse, and after political pressure was applied, certainly they pulled out all the stops to get it done, and we appreciate that.
Resolve kind of realistically. So do the islanders accept that BT's argument that 2 faults over 11 years demonstrates adequate levels of resilience?
No, they don't. I would respectfully suggest to BT that frequency is not a relevant metric when the consequence could be catastrophic. 2 faults that remove core communications, emergency calling, essential services, commerce for weeks at a time, that's not resilience at all. And the fact that this has happened twice, it will happen again, and there is still no backup plan that will kick in effectively to replace that feed at the exchange.
I hope they're listening and there's a backup plan done soon.
Thanks, Elaine. We're now going to move on to look at the situation in Orkney and Shetland. Maureen, I think you have the next question.
Yeah, to yourself, Mhari. Excuse me, I've got a sore throat this morning. We've just heard about the severe impact Storm Amy had on Tiree, but turning to the disruption of Shetland that Shetland faced in 2022, did the outage create similar challenges?
Yes, absolutely. The outage in 2022, unlike the situation in Tiree, wasn't related to storm damage. It was related to infrastructure damaged caused by an alternative mechanism. the outage in 2022 was, I would say, catastrophic in terms of impact on the community, in terms of making the community not feel safe. If I was to describe it as living in a war zone when all your comms is cut off. Unlike Tiree, Shetland actually does not have a single point of failure. We're very lucky that Faroese Telecom have infrastructure that comes to Shetland, comes down from Faroe, then goes to Orkney and then on to mainland Scotland. So the main cable is the one that goes south. That is the main cable that the connectivity is through. And if there's any problems with that main cable, the idea is that everything reroutes to the north. When we had the catastrophic outage in 2022, the resilience cable to the north was currently broken. It had been severed by, I believe, a fishing vessel. The catastrophic outage happened when the cable that goes south also was severed by a vessel. This is not storm related at all. It cut off all the mobile phone masts. It cut off everybody's connectivity, essentially. 999 calls, there was no certainty that they would work. The police declared a major incident. The police, within their means, put out more people into the community, and the community was informed to flag down an emergency vehicle if you were in that kind of situation. So it was quite terrifying. Faroese Telecom acted as fast as they could, and Faroese Telecom, I would say, are always pretty efficient and they get on the case pretty quick. And what they did, I believe, was they put in a temporary solution. The cable wasn't fully severed. There were still some fibres that were operational, so they were able to do something to do with putting more power or signal strength through. By close of play that day, BT, or the BT group, had put in a similar temporary solution. So for one full day, it was catastrophic outage in terms of comms, I would say. And then for a period of about 10 days, whilst Faroese Telecom coordinated the repairs to that cable, there was ongoing disruption, including to members of the community who rely on these telecare systems. It was probably during 2022 that we realised, although probably as a community didn't properly understand, that some internet service providers have resilience built in and some don't. But yeah, all the things that Rhoda has highlighted in terms of Tiree, it was a similar situation in Shetland, and it was not nice to feel unsafe in your community.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that, Mhari. You've actually covered my next question, which was about, what impact it had, but, you're saying the police had it as a major incident. So I think you've covered that, critical systems that went down and how that's affected the community. So thank you very much for that.
Douglas McAllister.
Thank you, Chair. My questions are also to Shetland's outspoken resident, as you described yourself. Can I turn to the damage that was caused in 2025? And as I understand it, there was 2 incidents, I think one in July 25 and one in October 25. The first likely to be caused by fishing boat damage, and perhaps the second due to rough seas. It was reported that some residents remained online while others lost their service for days. Was there that disparity, and can you explain why that was the case?
Yeah, I'll try to explain.
Right.
So we had I was one of the customers that was impacted by having no connectivity in my home. My parents were also impacted, who are in their 80s. The July outage, the cable break to the Shifa 2 cable, which is owned by Faroese Telecom, the break happened between Orkney and mainland Scotland. So that impacted customers in Shetland and in Orkney. In October, we had a 26-day outage, and the break was somewhere off Orkney, so it just affected Shetland customers in that particular instance. It was very confusing to be a member of the community whose connectivity has gone off, but your neighbour is on. So, as an outspoken member of the community, I decided to do a little bit of digging, and what we now understand is that some internet service providers, predominantly, obviously Faroese Telecom and Shetland Telecom, the ones that are linked to the BT group, so that's EE, PlusNet and BT themselves, they follow network guidance and they have resilience built in. They have the ability, it's automatic, the traffic reroutes. If you are with Sky, Utility Warehouse, TalkTalk, Vodafone, what we realise now is that they do not pay for resilience. So when that cable broke, and as the repairs get organised, those customers just have no connectivity. There's no, people in the community were going, well, why don't they just reroute to the other cable? There's no commercial agreement in place for those companies. There is capacity on the Faroese cable that goes north to Shetland. There is the possibility to put arrangements in place, but at some point, those internet service providers have made a commercial decision. Do you know what? A single point of failure is okay. And that's what the community are not happy about.
I ask if your internet service provider had that alternative cable route, your own. Did you experience that?
So I was with Vodafone,
yep.
And no, we were just off. We were off for 12 days in July and 26 days in October.
Without internet? Without
any internet, no landline. Now, it's not a catastrophe like July or the situation in Tiree because, you know, I had friends. I could go and do whatever, my internet there. It wasn't a case of the 22 outage when, you know, cash machines are down and supermarkets aren't operating. But it did have a profound impact on those businesses and householders, including vulnerable householders, who found themselves, right, okay, I understand now, I'm with an ISP that doesn't have resilience.
Right. So I take it wasn't widely known at the time, but is it widely known now in relation to the providers that do and the providers that don't?
Oh, it is absolutely widely known now which providers. And during the outage, particularly the second one,
yep.
People tried to leave those ISPs in their masses.
Right.
There's one-touch switch. Customers should be able to change their internet service provider with ease. A lot of people hadn't moved after the July outage because they were waiting for the compensation to come through, the automatic compensation that never arrived. So we were a bit disgruntled. Again, we were facing another outage, but by that point, people don't care about the compensation anymore. They just want a digital connection. Many people tried to move providers. In their droves, they were trying to move. Those internet service providers happily took the orders, and it didn't work. In the vast majority of cases, it didn't work due to some sort of failure with the local OpenReach network that wouldn't enable all switchover stuff to happen.
When you and other islanders took out the contracts originally, when you entered into those contracts, were you aware of the fact that they were failing to follow the network guidance that you spoke about?
Absolutely not. There is nothing at the point of sale
right.
that tells the customer how resilient.
And is there now?
No, absolutely.
Have you had communication with them about that?
Let's call them the weak ISPs. The response to the community has been pretty woeful.
Right.
They would claim things when you reported the outage. We'll give you unlimited data. We'll send you a mini hub. But those things don't work either because the infrastructure isn't adequate for the number of people needing to use it.
How satisfied have you been with their response since? I mean, are they taking steps now, those companies that you mentioned, Vodafone, TalkTalk, Sky, are they taking steps now to build that resilience and comply with the guidance?
I have asked the question of Sky and Vodafone because I've been dealing with Sky with my parents. Neither of the operators would answer the question about whether they are going to use the existing resilience backup route that is currently available. They speak about new cables coming a few years down the line, or they speak about new satellite systems that are maybe going to be developed. There is no action that they are committing to take just now, even though they made those commitments after the 22 and the July outage. There doesn't seem to be any evidence of any real progress having been made.
What message do you have for them this morning then, if they're watching this?
Well, I'm not sure if they've got any customers left in Shetland, because I think most of them have moved on to the more reliable providers. They have absolutely failed island communities. If they're not prepared to follow network guidance, then they just shouldn't provide a service to island communities. There needs to be more openness and transparency about the level of service that they are able to provide to communities like Shetland. But perhaps more than that, Ofcom are the regulator. And they made a very sobering point at a resilience summit that was organised in our community. They have the guidance. It's guidance. They don't have any powers to enforce these ISPs to actually build resilience into the systems. Similar with the compensation schemes. It's voluntary and non-enforceable. I think the community is currently feeling that Ofcom is a bit of a toothless regulator, and they don't have the legislative framework behind them to do what they need to do to build resilience in service provision in communities like Shetland.
That's very interesting. Thank you very much, Mhari. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think we'll now move on to a bit of an overview of the islands. Angus MacDonald.
Thank you. Just a quick one before I ask this question. Rhoda, do we know why the Tiree one, Storm Amy, I'm surprised that a storm above the sea would damage a cable under the sea. But are we sure that it was a storm that caused it?
We, as a community, haven't been given that information. I do believe that it was a break in the cable. So, to my knowledge, it was a pretty clean break. But that's anecdotal. I think one of the things that is often, I guess, forgotten when it comes to things that sit under the sea is the extent to which the swell moves them and moves them around. And the particular part where that cable comes in, it broke about 600 metres offshore just behind the exchange. It's a very, very rocky area of ground. It could have been cut. It could have been wearing for years. It could have been damaged, and that storm affected it. It has been broken before, as BT have told us, with 2 faults in 11 years. I believe that was related to a fishing boat, and I'm also aware of anecdotal evidence of that cable moving under the seabed. It's plotted, but it does move under the seabed and has been lifted before now by fishing boats and put back down again.
And you mentioned two basically dragged anchors. Or was it you, Mhari? The 2 dragged anchors, which off Shetland. There were 4 instances of Shetland, weren't there? Of which 2. So Shetland experienced 4 instances in 3 years.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I believe so. If sometimes you were not so aware of the damage, and sometimes you are.
Do we think it is always ship or anchors that are causing them in Shetland?
So hopefully Faroese Telecom will be able to provide you with the answers, but in many cases I believe that the core infrastructure has been damaged by vessels, and occasionally I believe that those vessels don't have their AIS systems switched on, which is mandatory in other countries in Europe. So certainly the 2022 outage, I believe, don't have 100% evidence, the North Cable was damaged, the South Cable was damaged, and I believe that it was the same vessel.
Do we know? I mean, can we assume the vessel was a local, Scottish vessel, or is there any suggestion that there was a foreign vessel, perhaps a Russian vessel in the area?
No, I think it was a fishing vessel. But Faroese Telecom will have that information to hand for you, and they might just tell me that it was a theory that it was the same vessel that damaged both cables.
The AIS, that tells you where the boat is, the ship is, but it doesn't tell you where the cable is, does it? So it can only be used to identify which boat did the damage not.
Right. In this last summer's outage, the vessel owner reported it very quickly. They recognised that they'd caused damage to the cable between Orkney and the mainland. I don't think that happened in 2022.
Has it been a regular thing over the decades, cables being caught up? Or is it just, I've never heard of it until 2 or 3 years ago, but has it happened over the last decade or two?
Want me to take
regularly?
I think it's important to learn from the examples of the power cables. So certainly on Tiree we had a real spate from about 2012 to 2016 where the power cables were deteriorating and go down, and it speaks volume that community-owned turbine projects now cannot get business interruption insurance for subsea cable damage because the power cables have been damaged so much that the insurers, the actuaries, know the risks of power cables. And the fibre cables, the first lot in Scotland were laid in 2014 under Digital Scotland Superfast Broadband. So those are now 12 years old. There's another set of those going in recently, which there are 16 cables to 15 islands. So you've got 35 cables down there, some of which are 12 years old, all rubbing on the seabed. So it's something waiting to happen. To me and to our members, it's a surprise that it's only happened twice in 11 years with cable damage. With the power companies, they take preventative actions. They examine the cables, they check them. As far as we're aware and as we were told when the Tiree cable was mended, we said, well, why don't you just check the rest of the cable back to Mull? No, we send a pulse of light down, and if the light goes down, it's fine. There was no attempt to look at the outside armouring, the next metal casing, then to see how many filaments were still working. There could be other sections. It was 1.5 kilometres that they replaced. There could be another section further down that equally is about to go. There isn't that attempt to predict what's going to happen. It's like, no, it won't happen, it'll be fine. And I think that's what we find worrying. That's certainly what our members find worrying, is they're anxious and they're concerned about it.
A question to British Telecom would be, what are you doing to provide, sustainability of the...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Elaine Stewart.
This is for you, Anne. So what are the main threats to communities when damage occurs and partial or total connectivity is down?
Well, we've been looking at this for quite some months, and we sent out a survey to our members and to contacts last month, and we had replies from 34 islands. We've got quite some rich data. I mean, the impacts are just what Rhoda and Mhari said, widespread across the islands. As I said, members are concerned. They're anxious and they're frustrated. They're anxious about the danger to life, things that Rhoda spoke about. The telecare thing in particular. There are instances in Mull and Isla where people's telecare didn't work. You talked about near misses. There are reports of quite a few very near misses. During Storm Amy, the Coast Guard didn't have any comms. There are examples of not being able to get 999 calls across the islands. And then just in terms of day-to-day life, it's just making it so much harder when this happens. They're frustrated with the amount of time it takes, and we talked about this earlier, about getting the repair. It's interesting that the repair team for Tiree came up from Kent. And you're thinking, why is the team in Kent? There's one boat that the cable providers pay into a scheme. That's based in Portland. The boat that came to the rescue in Shetland is in Dieppe. I understand the MOD has a cable boat, but there are two boats, and so we're all conscious, all the islands are conscious that, say, Shetland goes down, what happens if Tiree goes down at the same time? We're going to have to wait for another island to be looked at first. So they're frustrated about the time it takes. There are so many processes. The way that the cables were laid and funded, the jurisdiction of UK government, the fact it's not devolved to Scotland, so you've got UK government overseeing that, you've got Scottish government money, you've got Openreach involved, you've got local authorities involved. As far as the community is aware, it's like, whose responsibility is this? Where do we go? How do we know what's happening? The agreements with Openreach, we don't know. We don't know what to expect. So the communities can't plan. They can't think, is it worth us investing in a Starlink? Is it worth us investing in a radio satellite broadband system? Because they're completely opaque. So we don't know what they're supposed to do. We don't know what best endeavours means.
You spoke about like the key systems that go down and threat to life that can happen. So are there other systems that are non-life threatening that go down? That,
Absolutely. And the thing that struck me was the fact that Rhoda talked about the timing of the time on Tiree. That was October into November. Lots of children, lots of school children were thinking about applying to colleges, universities with deadlines. If that had happened on a UCAS deadline and they couldn't get their applications in, if it happened during prelims, they wouldn't have been able to do their online tests. There were examples of somebody trying to complete a house purchase. The bank didn't have any comms, so they had to go to the mainland in order to complete their house purchase. It's widespread. There's people couldn't make their insurance claims because they couldn't get online.
The threats to day-to-day life as well.
And this isn't just Tiree, this is across all different reports.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Maureen Burke.
Right. And overall, do you consider current backup plans from internet service providers to be adequate when a cable is damaged?
Absolutely not. And I think, given the evidence that the colleagues have talked about, it's the uncertainty of what's going to be provided. We didn't know what Openreach was going to provide for Tiree. Other communities have seen what's happened in Shetland, what's happened in Tiree, so they're wondering what would happen to us. There's no minimum resilience standard. We don't know what we're going to get. We're very much at the help that a team might be sent up. So Rhoda talked about the team who came up from Kent, who were incredibly brilliant on Tiree. But that was probably down to the team. Once you get into higher management levels, it's, well, we can't do this, we can't do that, because of the agreements with the Starlink. And I think that's something to be aware of. What can be done, what agreements can be put in place where there could be more Starlinks deployed. Mm-hmm. We're a small island in Tiree. If it happens in a bigger island, are 4 units enough? Can we only have them for a week? We need them for 5 weeks.
Mm. Yeah, I think there's lots of barriers there that is causing the issue. But so, what alternative measures are needed in place to ensure continued connectivity on the island when a cable is damaged?
Well, communities have seen the islands, 34 different islands that have replied, have starting to put in their own measures. So lots of development trusts in the islands are buying Starlinks as backup. Lots of individuals are buying Starlinks. Islanders who can have generators. One of the biggest issues is power. So when the power goes, the masts don't work. But that's fine if you can afford it. Tiree was fortunate in having personnel who are experienced in connectivity, so they could step in. If it happened on the neighbouring island of Cole, I'm not sure if they had the same expertise. They didn't have the systems in place. I think we're in danger of an economic divide as well between those who can afford to have a generator, to have a backup, have Starlink. I was able to get a different data plan very quickly. Not everybody can afford to have a full data plan to take its place. There's definitely a danger of a divide between those who can and those who can't, and between the community trusts who have the money and have the money to pay for staff to help sort things out while this is going on. Again, on Tiree, we were very fortunate to have a large trust that could manage it and oversee it. If you're in a small island with just a community association, you don't have that backup.
Oh, you can see the barriers there again, financially as well for people.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for that.
Supplementary question from
well, I'm just on that. I'm just looking at what are the associated costs then, and why would that disparity between being able to have Starlink and not?
We've got, lots of people looked at getting Starlink during the outage in Tiree, and they have in other islands. So you've got the upfront cost of £299 for the rectangular dish, or you could have a free dish with a contract, so you're committed to paying £70 a month for a year. You could change your data plan, but then you'd need a full data plan. If you've got children doing schoolwork online, they each need access. So it's significant, the extra costs.
Yeah.
It can be quite a lot of money for some families.
Yeah. And I'd like to make the point that when Mhari talked about compensation, it's not that we're grasping for money, it's literally to compensate for those costs. So if you've had to take out an extra data package, you need to get that money back to cover that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The last question comes back to me, and I'd like to ask each of you, if there was one thing that you could do to ensure that the impact of subsea cable damage, however it's caused, is not as severe for islanders, what would it be? I'll start with you, Mhari. Just one. Hopefully you'll all have different things, and we'll get. You can sneak in two if you know.
Well, I think don't say the same one as me, okay? I think that all levels of government need to be there needs to be actually more cables. If there's more subsea cables, if we're all serious about there being more subsea cables and having routes and different fallback positions when cables do inevitably get damaged, that certainly would improve Shetland's prospects going forward in the future. There's so many though.
Yeah, and maybe some routine maintenance to go with it. By the sounds of it.
I think that to be fair to Faroese Telecom, there is routine maintenance that happens, because we had my poor, weak ISP. There was also an incident in 2023 when it went off, and that was Faroese Telecom doing some regular maintenance. They let all the ISPs know that was going to be happening, but the ISPs failed to pass on the information to the customer.
Thank you. I think that's given us another one about communication as well, so thanks for that, Rhoda.
I think critically for me, we have to try and eliminate single points of failure. Islands should not be on a single spur. We should be looking at loops, so to ensure that there's a backup plan. The alternative is some sort of planned failover, so that if we don't have a loop system, it should be mandated that there is either a microwave or a satellite failover to these exchanges. And my last one, if I may squeeze it in, is that emergency calling resilience has to be taken very, very seriously in our rural and island areas, and that even if your exchange and the ISPs have a satellite failover, there should be a separate backhaul route, be it satellite or whatever else, and power to masts which are run by the emergency services network.
Thank you. Anne?
I think mine is more general, and it's about asking for an assessment of the impact of failure on all of these cables. As I say, there are 35, 36 cables out there, and we have no idea what might be happening. And I think an assessment of, is there a backup if it fails, what's needed, and what would be put in place.
Thank you. I think there's a supplementary from Angus.
Rhoda, just this question about the so the telecoms are 999 and internet. So you explained that electricity came back on again, but the 999 did not come back on again. And I assume from that 999 comes down a digital line rather than an analog line. And this comes up in casework to me the whole time. People are concerned that 999 will not work if the internet stops working. Can you just clarify that 999 requires internet?
There's probably people more qualified than me who can clarify the exact position on 999. But as I understand it, your 999 calls over an analog line are almost can be made without any difficulty at all. As long as your incoming is analog. One of the things that we've not discussed this afternoon, and is probably part of a wider discussion, is the switch off of analog. And I would suspect that is where a lot of people's concerns are coming from. When you just pick up the phone and it's linked to the exchange, you can make your phone call. When you have a power outage, all of your phones, your digital voice works on electricity. Everything requires power. It needs your router to have power. It needs the handset to have power. And that is the big concern. So it's not even the cable, assuming the cable is fine, a power cut could render you unable to make a phone call, particularly older people who may not instantly reach for their mobile.
So in 4G, in my mobile phone, okay, so we have a power cut, it comes back on again. Could my mobile phone, not using the radio waves, because it's not using the internet in order to function, but clearly it stopped working on Tiree, the mobile phone system?
Your mobile phone works from 4G, and 4G is a form of internet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for the evidence this morning. It's been extremely helpful, and it's raised at some points we'd heard before when we visited the islands, and some points that we hadn't heard before. So it's been very, very helpful in reinforcing some ideas, but also in raising some new points to us. So thank you all for making the time to come down. Glad you got here safely. Hope you get back equally safely. And hopefully we don't hear any problems on the islands with connectivity for a wee while at least. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Digital connectivity in Scotland, but particularly in our islands. And we're very grateful to you for being with us virtually today. Could you just very briefly introduce yourself and your role, please?
Good morning. My name is Páll Vesturbú, and I'm the Managing Director of the infrastructure part of Faroese Telecom. So operates the local infrastructure here on the islands and also the Shetland cable.
That's great, thank you very much. Can I begin by asking you how many times Shetland 2 has experienced damage since it entered service?
So the Shetland 2 entered service in 2007, and unfortunately we have had many breaks. So we have had over 20 breaks during the period.
Okay, and are those categorised into severe and minor issues?
Usually when we have these breaks, so they are so severe that we need a repair ship to enter the site and do a repair. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for that. That's very helpful. Can I pass you over now to Angus MacDonald?
Paul, we've been hearing from the people who've been Shetland and Tiree and the other islands in Scotland, which you probably listened in on. And we were talking about fishing and anchoring being one of the main risks to cable damage. Is this a new thing? And is it something where you can see a solution?
Yeah, so if I just can explain our experience with the faults we have. The large amount of those faults have been caused by fishing vessels. So during the first years, so there was nothing really to do about that. We could not really find the vessels which did it. But in the last years, we have been able to obtain some data from Scottish government, which helps us to identify the vessels. So usually the vessels operate with, which has caused the damage, they operate with the AIS system turned off. And but all fishing vessels have another system, which is the VMS vessel monitoring system, which is used by the fishing authorities to keep track of the vessels. And we have been able to get those information from a freedom of information request to the authorities.
And I might have missed this, and you have the ability to fine them, or what can you do in order to encourage them not to?
Yeah, if I can just say, the main part of the fishing vessels, they operate with the AIS turned on as they should. So there are some very, very few vessels actually, which is our experience, that deliberately turn the AIS system off for some reasons. And usually those are the vessels that have caused damage to the cable. And when there's no AIS system, it is very difficult to find out which vessel did it. So one thing is that we would like there to be a better enforcement on the AIS system regulation there. But then there is the other system, the VMS system, which the vessel usually, or I guess they always have turned on, because that's more serious if that is turned off. And it is then possible to get to track the vessel. We don't really get information about what vessel did it, but from that information, we can usually, after some time, track what vessel did the damage.
And are they Faroese or are they Scottish boats, or do we have any way of identifying? It's not done on purpose, I presume.
No, we don't presume it's done on purpose. It's done. It's accidental. Usually, it is Scottish boats. Usually.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elaine Stewart.
Oh, it's been reported that part of Shefa 2 cables were not buried deep because the risk of damage was thought to be low at the time. Is Shefa looking to rectify this?
Yes. So when the Shefa was laid, the route was selected between the Faroe Islands and Shetland, and then Orkney and Scotland. And the purpose of Shefa was to serve the users here in Faroe Islands. That was the main purpose of Shefa. But then also we could connect the islands. And actually the route seems to be quite challenging. So the cable originally was buried on all the positions where it was possible to have it buried, and so that was so and then there are challenges on the route regarding burial, and also the seabed conditions, they can change over time. So we have experienced that. So yeah.
Burying them deeper has got challenges due to the seabed. Are we looking at burying them deeper? Yeah,
it is very difficult to bury an existing cable deeper. So when we have a repair, the vessel that does the repair has some jetting equipment where you can jet the cable into the seabed. But when there is hard rock seabed, then it's very difficult to do anything. So the cable has to be in that location. But that is also a reason why the cables are very well marked on all charts, and all the information is very well distributed to all the fishing environment.
And that would be the main challenge, do you think, to burying it deeper?
It would be a main challenge to bury it deeper all over the route where the Shefa is today, yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, Paul. Following the latest damage to Shefa 2 in October 2025, it was reported that repairs could take up to 3 weeks. How long did it take in the end?
Yeah, the last repair actually, that was caused by bad weather, and the repair was very close to the shore, and it was complex because of that. So it was a complexer repair than usual. So there had to be made a lot of preparation work on the site, on the beach, also to prepare a new landing. So therefore, the repair took about a month. It took a month to repair.
Okay, thank you for that. While Shetland and Orkney experienced significant disruption during these repairs, it was reported that those on the Faroe Islands did not lose internet connection. Why was this the case?
That was because there is another cable system also serving the islands here, the Faroe Islands. So that was working during the whole disruption of the Shetland cable. So the other cable served the local industry here.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you.
Well, in your written evidence to the committee, you mentioned that repair timelines depend very much on how quickly vessels and equipment can be mobilised. Could you walk us through this process and explain why delays occur?
Yeah, usually a repair can take, if everything works well, it can take about a week, or between a week and then up to 10 days, maybe 2 weeks usually. And things that can influence that is typically if there is bad weather. Of course, nobody can do anything about that. That can cause a delay. And also if the vessel is busy with another repair at the time we have the fault. So I think that it was mentioned before, there are very few repair vessels so doing it. But usually it takes a week, 10 days, yeah.
Does your company have its own repair vessels, or does it have to rely on others for that?
Yeah, so we have agreement with a company that does this kind of service. So we have a vessel allocated. So usually it can go out if it's not busy doing another repair. Yeah. Okay.
And are there any steps that could be taken to ensure that repairs take place more quickly?
Yeah, it is a bit difficult. Yeah, you asked for a walkthrough of the process. So the vessel has to do some mobilization. So the vessel usually it's quite ready to leave the harbor. The vessel that we have is located in France, and then it has to sail. It takes some days to sail to the repair site, and then also to pick up the cable and do the jointing of the cable, put in a new piece of undamaged cable. So all this process typically take around 1 week or 10 days. Yeah.
Thank you very much. The next question is from Elaine Stewart.
Well, you say that it's operationally complex to conduct routine inspection of the cables. Why might this be?
Yeah, so it's a very large system going all the way from Faroe Islands to down to Scotland, and it is a very costly affair to do a routine inspection. So we do more targeted inspections of areas that we think are critical, and so yeah, that is the reason. Yeah.
You've also said that the risk is not equal everywhere. Are you confident that you have sufficiently identified current hotspots?
Of course, we know the hotspots. We know where we usually or where we had the faults, but unfortunately, there can also be new locations. So seabed conditions can change, and maybe fishing over the cable can also disturb the condition of the cable. So, but usually we know approximately the areas where the risk of faults are. Yeah.
Given that hotspots can change over time, how are you monitoring and adapting to this change?
Yeah. So regarding monitoring, we have a service. We have a service. There's a company having a service for us, which is monitoring the cable, and it is monitoring all the activity of vessels around the cable, and it contacts all the vessels which seems to be operating near the cable to warn them about risks. But of course, they are using the AIS system to have this surveillance, so it's necessary that the vessel has the AIS turned on.
Thank you.
Supplementary from MacDonald.
Paul, on these cables, In our previous discussion, before you joined the call, we spoke about how long they lasted, these cables, and that power cables are armoured and seem to be much more resilient. And the digital cables, they were talking about them being 12 years old, and they were worried about the resilience of them and the damage caused by, for example, rubbing against rocks, etc. Have you any idea how long you expect these underwater digital cables to last?
Yeah, so usually we estimate that the cable can last 25 years. That is the historical lifetime of the cable, but that has also been connected with the technology in the cable, the technology itself. In some cables, there is technology. There are repeaters repeating the signal with certain distances in the cable. But in our case, the Shefa 2 cable, it does not have repeaters. So it's just a cable from end to end with no active equipment. So in principle, if the Shefa 2 cable was intact without too many damages, it could last much longer than 25 years.
Thank you.
May I come to your question?
And my last question, which is really a bit of a different one from the discussion up to now. Excuse me. The Faroes have got 5G everywhere, and we're very jealous of that. What did you do in order to make a decision to make that happen? And is it financially viable? And you think it's something could be replicated in remote Scotland?
Yeah, I think what I can contribute to that is I think we had two companies here, with each having their own mobile network for some years, and building out the network over the islands. And it was very well built out all over the islands. But when the decision was made by the owners of the networks to install 5G, it was at that time they could see that it would be very expensive to have two parallel networks delivering 5G services. And I think one lesson, if we could contribute to anything, is that for small societies with not too many, not so large populations, it's very important to focus on resilience for the networks, and maybe not so much on competition on the infrastructure, where that can be done more in places where there are a lot of larger populations. So I think that has contributed to when they started to build out 5G, it was decided just to build one network, and then one network was expanded and the other network was decommissioned. So I think that improves the situations in smaller communities.
Okay. And the cost? Have you any idea what it cost the Faroes to become 5G?
Yeah, the cost. Yeah, it's just difficult to put one number just now on the cost of 5G. Of course, it's an expensive build out, because when the 5G was built out here, all the other technologies were built out as well. The 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G, and now there are talks about decommissioning the older technologies. But yeah. So it is a significant cost, and I think it's very sensible to focus on just building one network when there is the small societies.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for being with us this morning. It's been very, very helpful to hear from you, your experiences of the cable and the issues that it has. So thank you very much again for joining us. We're visiting the Faroes in a couple of weeks' time, so we might bump into you on our travels. But thank you again, and I now close the meeting. Order.